An Israeli court just ruled that any Arabic language school or funding transport for Arab school children in the northern city of Karmiel is banned. The court says that anything otherwise would alter city's demographic balance and damage its character.
Until the years 2000, maybe even less, we had students who took the final exams in Arabic. No more ever since. Students lack the motivation. For them, the Arabic language as I see that is related to the Arab itself. We don't like the Arab, we don't need the Arab, and we don't want the Arab. So why do we need his language? It's totally equivalent, unfortunately.
In its decision, the court cited so-called nation-state basic law. This law was passed in 2018 and caused public uproar against it, inside Israel and outside Israel, for its apartheid nature. This move is not unprecedented, but shows Israel's racist policies on the indigenous people of the land. An Israeli court has ruled that the northern city of Karmiel is a Jewish city and that Arabic language schools or funding transport for Arab school children are liable to alter city's demographic balance and damage its character. Thus, it has blocked access to schools for Arab children in the northern city of Karmiel. The court implied that facilitating this access would incentivize Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel to move into the city, thus damaging its Jewish character. This is also true for funding the transportation of Palestinian Arab children living in the city to schools in surrounding communities. The ruling came after a lawsuit which charged that the city of Karmiel was violating its obligation to provide transportation for Arab Israeli children to local schools was dismissed out of hand. In the case, the plaintiffs sued the Karmiel municipality for 25,000 shekels, approximately $7,500, for transportation expenses for two Arab siblings, a brother and sister, who were forced to travel to a school in a nearby town because there are no Arabic language schools located in the city. For years, families and activists have demanded that the Karmiel municipality fund school transportation for Israeli Arab children and has appealed to the Israeli Education Ministry to widen the map of neighboring communities associated with Karmiel's school transportation program, but obviously to no avail.
The judge ruled ruling is not surprising because the goal of establishing Jewish towns in the midst of Galilee is actually to Judaize the Galilee and prevent a majority of Arabs living there. So they don't want the Arabs to feel comfortable in the mixed towns. Okay, if they want to, just go and live, pay, property taxes and stuff, but they don't want them to establish, Arabic symbols. Like the language is one big symbol. So they refer to the national bill that was put in 2018, which clearly states that the state of Israel is for the Jewish people, and they actually demoted the Arabic language from being an official language into a language with a special status. But that status was not defined really in a way so that anybody could come and refer to the national bill as they did in this ruling, and base a ruling saying that Arabic is not a language and this is the Jewish state, and just use the basic law to to say no to any demand that has a flavor of nationality, such as the Arabic language. Like in Karmiel, here in Nazareth Elite, or as recently changed, the city's name was changed to Nov HaGalil. We have a long struggle here for many years to establish an Arabic school in the city of Nov HaGalil, where at least, according to the Ministry of Education, there's about 40% of children in this city between the ages 5 and 19 that are Arab in the city. Okay, and the population of the Arabs in this city is about 30%. So far, we only have kindergartens, and starting, from first grade through the 12th grade, we have to go and find solutions outside the city with an ongoing refusal. So we have been in the courts since 2013. The political struggle actually started way before, like at least 15 years before. And we are actually awaiting the Supreme Court's ruling on our case. The reason, in my opinion, and many others who are in this struggle with me, that the municipality and actually the Ministry of Education refused our request to establish an Arab school is actually to protect and preserve the Jewish the Jewish status in the city, or the Jewish ethos. And so for them, we are only residents. We should not have any nationality rights. And they don't want us to establish a community, because if you establish a school, that means you establish a community. My son will have other kids in his age living in the neighborhood, and then there will be relations between me and that child's parents, and then you will have actually a living community that grows and feels more at home in the city, as opposed to just using it as like a hotel, because we all work outside, study outside, and then just come and sleep here. So there's no real community life here. So they don't want us to feel at home here. And recently they ran like people started demonstrating in front of the city municipality. Like first they ask for a school, and then they will ask for a mosque. Like presenting actually the fact that they don't want any symbol of Arab, the Arab culture, whether it is Muslim or Christian, or the language inside the city.
On social media, the conversation took a different turn. Raymond says Israel continues to steal Palestinian land on which to build illegal settlements in the opinion of almost every nation on earth. When Israel shows its disregard for human rights and ignoring international law, it gets criticized. Citizen Jane says Israel invokes nation-state law in denying transport to Palestinian school children in Galilee. Damascus Frey said Netanyahu literally said, according to the basic nationality law we passed, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, and only it.
للأسف إذا بنطلع على قانون القومية بنفسه بحذافيره، طبعا فيه تفرقة عنصرية واضحة اتجاه العرب بالأساس. إسرائيل هي الدولة الوحيدة بالعالم اللي بتعرف نفسها حسب تعريف ديني ومش تعريف قومي. يعني لو بدي أطرح تساؤل من هالشكل، إذا أجت اليوم ألمانيا أو أمريكا وعرفت نفسها كدولة مسيحية وتعطي الأولوية والأفضلية للسكان المسيحيين بغض النظر عن إنسانيته وقوميته، فالإشي طبعا هو عنصري بمفهومه المطلق.
بالنسبة للسؤال تبعك، طبعا لازم يكون للعرب في إسرائيل مدارسهم الخاصة اللي بتأخذ بعين الاعتبار خاصيتهم من ناحية اللغة ومن ناحية ثقافة، وكونهم بيعيشوا بمدن مختلطة اللي فيها يهود أيضا، هذا ما بقلل من حقهن إنه يكون إلهن مدارسهن، لأنه تاريخيا لما قامت دولة إسرائيل كانت تعترف باللغة العربية كلغة رسمية. صحيح في الفترة الأخيرة تم سن قانون القومية اللي بيقلل من قيمة اللغة العربية من الناحية القانونية، لكن هذا ليس سبب لحرمان العرب من أنه يكون عندهم مدارسهم الخاصة، خصوصا بالمدن المختلطة. اللي بيكون فيها تعددية من ناحية مدارس، سواء بتكون في هناك مدارس للمتدينين، مدارس عامة لكل الفئات، فهم حقا يكون المدرسة للعرب.
يعني بدون أدنى شك، وإذا انطلقت من الحق الأساسي في التعليم للأولاد بغض النظر عن مكان سكناهم، فطبعا من المفروض أنه يكون في مدرسة لكل مجموعة طلاب، وأنه كل مدرسة كمان تتناسب مع ثقافتهن مع لغتهن، لأنه في المدن المختلطة الأولاد الفلسطينيين من الأساس بيعيشوا في جو اختلاط، في جو اللي هن ما بيمارسوا لغتهن الأم بشكل كامل وتام.
Many people say that we should forget about 48 and we should just start a new chapter. But what happened in 48, namely the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, never stopped ever since 48. And therefore we have to continue to remind ourselves that this ethnic cleansing and apartheid system is still around and nothing changed ever since 48. And Karmiel is just an example for what we all know. I mean, those who are sensitive enough for human rights know that being a Palestinian or an Israeli Arab in Israel means to be a second-class citizen. Being a Jew means to be a first-class citizen.
The court based its ruling on the so-called nation-state basic law. This law was passed in 2018 and caused public uproar against it, inside Israel and outside Israel, for its apartheid nature. On July 19, 2018, the Israeli Knesset voted 62 to 55 to approve the Jewish nation-state basic law that constitutionally enshrines Jewish supremacy and the identity of Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. This law, which has distinct apartheid characteristics, guarantees the ethnic religious character of Israel as exclusively Jewish and entrenches the privileges enjoyed by Jewish citizens, while simultaneously anchoring discrimination against the Israeli Arab minorities and legitimizing exclusion, racism, and systematic inequality. Karmiel was one of several cities and towns strategically established starting in the mid-1960s as part of an Israeli initiative to attempt to expand the Jewish presence in the Galilee, where Arabs made up most of the population. Karmiel is one of more than 700 communities the state has built for the Jewish population since Israel's founding, compared with none built for the Arab population. In March 1976, the Israeli military began confiscating and expanding several Jewish towns in the area. This was met by confrontations, including general strikes and street battles. This is known as Land Day and is commemorated every year in March.
These towns that were established in the Galilee, and starting in the 50s, 60s, and on, had a clear goal, which is to Judaize the Galilee. okay, which means establishing Jewish settlements in the midst of the Arab towns to prevent Arabic continuous territory, okay? So the language of Arabic is, part of it's a national representation. It represents the language, it represents the culture. So for them, it contradicts the goal, which is to have a Jewish-only settlement. Another aspect of this struggle is the refusal to accept that we have been here forever, okay, and that these towns like Nofa Galil, Karmiel, Afula were all established on confiscated Arab land. So like Palestinians living in Nazareth, in Raini, in Ain Mahel, in Iksal, all these surrounding Arab towns, they have all, their lands were lost by the confiscation in order to establish the city, Nofa Galil. So where the official language of the municipality is that we are coming here to attain equality of life, because there's no quality of life in neighboring cities. Well, this is obviously a sarcastic way of looking at things, because the city of Nazareth, which has double the population of Nofa Galil, is sitting on only 14 square kilometers, whereas Nofa Galil, which is half, and all on confiscated land established in 1957, is residing on at least 33 square kilometers. So it's very normal that people living in high density will want to emigrate and move to a town which is more offering more places to live in.
On social media, the conversation took a different turn. David says that Israel allocated 99.7% of public land in the occupied West Bank to Israeli settlers, illegal under international law. Only 0.24% went to the Palestinians. The nation-state law embedded apartheid. Have a look at it. The simple truth is that people had to be driven off their land. Noga says Netanyahu, the nation-state lawman who made Arabic not an official language and defined only Jewish communal rights in Israel, tells the Likud, "I believe in Jabotinsky's vision that every Israeli citizen should enjoy all rights. We appeal to Arab citizens, this time vote for us." Kieran says the nation-state law turns non-Jews in Israel into second-class citizens. In the occupied territories, Palestinians are under military law, while settlers are under Israeli civil law. Apartheid in action.
كمان مرة أعطيك مثال اللي هو نوفا جليل. نوفا جليل اليوم متواجد بحدود 4000 طالب عربي، بتراوح الأعمار هن من جيل البستان 3-4 سنين لصف 12 إنهاء المدرسة الثانوية. 4000 طالب هن كمية كبيرة جدا. 90% منهن، هاي أرقام مدروسة، 90% منهن بتعلموا خارج المدينة نوفا جليل لسبب واحد اللي هو مركزي وأساسي، إنه فيش مدرسة عربية بنوفا جليل.
للأسف الشديد احنا بنلاحظ انه منذ أكثر من 10 سنين واليمين قاعد بتمادى وله أغلبية في الانتخابات واستطلاعات الرأي كلها بتقوم من مكانتهن، واحنا بنشوف دائما انه حتى في المستقبل مش مبين انه في تغيير على الصعيد السياسي من ناحية الجوهر السياسي لدولة إسرائيل. اليمين كتير قوي وبقوى أكتر وأكتر، فبالوقت الراهن أنا بحاول أقنع حالي إنه هن مش دولة فصل عنصري، لكن إذا بيستمروا إحنا مش بعد كتير.
أكيد. يعني واضح لإلي كمواطنة كفلسطينية تعيش في إسرائيل بأنها دولة فصل عنصري. يعني الأمر كان مطبق حتى قبل ما يسن القانون. يعني إجا القانون حسب رأيي بس لشرعنة وتثبيت هذا النظام. يعني
Well, this is what happens when you have the concept of a settler nation. A settler nation is a nation that basically invalidates the people of the land that they wish to settle. It's ethnic cleansing. The way that we can see that whatever the Israelis have done, or the Zionists, really from the very earliest start, because my grandfather was a Zionist doctor who was kicked out of being the Zionist doctor of Palestine in Jerusalem in 1911 because he said, well, I'm a doctor, I take care of Arabs, and they said no, and they sent him away. And that's why he came to the United States. So the fact is that this is a country which has its basis in the deprivation of health, life, land to the people, and Karmiel was a beautiful place which had all kinds of gardens and parks, and it was beautiful before the Israelis took it over. But they did it as a cat's paw on the way, I think, to the northern part when they took, because it was established in 1964. In 1967 came the war where the Israelis captured Golan.
Although Arabs now constitute around 6% of Karmiel's population, that is around 2,760 people, there is still no Arabic language school inside the city. As such, Arab-Israeli parents are forced to send their children to various schools in the area. According to the Education Ministry, it doesn't take part in school organization, just the funding and content of what's being learned. It says that the money goes to municipalities and that they use it for transportation and schools. The ministry says the funding is sufficient. However, the municipalities say the funding is not. Many of them are accused of pocketing the money. This dilemma has been faced by the Arab population for decades now. It seems that Israel wants to further isolate the Arabs. At least, that is how they feel. Through decades of neglect and now political isolation, the conditions might be just getting worse. Here is the news making the press in Israel. The Jerusalem Post. For the first time since the inception of Israel, the Jewish population dropped below 74%, according to the Israeli Immigration Policy Center, IPC, who cited data from Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics. Also this year, the number of Jewish immigrants hit a record low of 33.8% of the total number of new immigrants, according to the IPC. The Times of Israel. Jewish extremists violently attack Arab car amid riots over settler's death. Following overnight protests in occupied Jerusalem Al-Quds over the death of 16-year-old Hilltop youth Ahuvia Sandag, who was killed in a car crash during a police chase after allegedly hurling stones at Palestinians last month, footage emerged of an extremist mob throwing rocks and other objects towards a vehicle driven by Arabs in the city, as well as attempting to open the car's door to attack the occupants. Ynet News. Prosecutors have released an amended indictment against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, removing any mention of his family in a corruption charge in which he is accused of trading favors with a powerful media mogul. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes in 3 corruption cases. Haaretz. Anti-corruption demonstrations across Israel continue into their 28th week, with 2 teens arrested for alleged attack in northern Israel. Israel police detained anti-government protesters outside the Prime Minister's official residence in occupied Jerusalem Al-Quds amid demonstrations across Israel, which have entered their 28th week. The remaining protesters, who numbered around 100, were removed from the street leading to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence and relocated.